and welcome to another episode of Anima-saurus. Today, I'm very lucky to have with me Gareth Cowen. Gareth, whereabouts are you actually based?
Hey man, thanks for having me on.
Hey.
Well, I'm in Auckland at the moment, so I'm testing that out
Yep.
for now and seeing how it goes and plugging in with that. But before that, I was pretty much East Coast Australia for as long as I could.
Yep. Well, yeah. Let's just start off talking about where it was. Like East Coast Australia is quite a big spot. Whereabouts did you sort of start off? What got you into being, you're now, I guess you'd be called a professional previs artist.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah, let's go with that.
I've never considered a title.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a bit like I guess where you're coming from too. I started from that Southeast Queensland experience. And we were that cohort from the early 2000s, and we were studying at QCA and things like that. And it's been really cool seeing the guys you're connecting with and interviewing, because they were the people that were around or a bit ahead of me, and seeing them talk now is really interesting. And then Sydney, right? So that seems to be the bounce that Queenslanders do, is you end up in you start off in Brisbane and then come down to Sydney, and then I did a stint in London, so that was like my big adventure overseas to try it. And now, in a pre-COVID world, I found myself in this really cool situation now that I can kind of pivot myself between Auckland, Wellington, East Coast Australia, and Adelaide. I'm not saying that I have a guaranteed supply of work there, but it's like, well, these are my choices now, and I figured that's a good problem to have. But that's
But that
roughly
didn't.
the geography.
Yeah, that didn't. Setting that sort of up doesn't exactly happen overnight. Being able to actually go, where up and down the east coast, like you said, starting off in Brisbane's, it had its Renaissance age, and there's then it dried out.
Right.
That's what sort of drove a lot of artists kind of ventured off down to Sydney from there, or Melbourne.
Totally.
Melbourne was another one.
Yeah, I've never done Melbourne.
Oh, okay.
Have you tried Melbourne?
I haven't done Melbourne as a job as such, but I know that there's quite a lot of people that kind of venture down that way, and there's a couple of companies down there that work. So yeah, but yeah, I did the same thing. So Sydney, your time in Brisbane, how long were you actually in Brisbane?
Man, I have to go back through the records now. I started studying about 2001. Never really completed I didn't complete my bachelor there because, there was this crappy TV show, which I'm happy to go on the record saying, a crappy TV show that was getting made there, and I started storyboarding for that badly, and thought, oh, cool, there's work around, and so I kind of went
straight for work. Yep.
Yeah, but that was actually more honest for me too. Is I realized I always wanted just an apprenticeship. I didn't really want to do the theory. It was much later in life that I was interested in the theory. Like now,
yep,
I'm interested, but at the time I just wanted technique. So it felt intuitive to do that. Was in Brisbane for a few, maybe 5 more years, three more years after that. The critical thing that happened there is I went on and did a short film with Dave Edwards, and that was the apprenticeship that I was looking for.
Was that Burleigh?
And that was Burleigh, yeah. So I am forever I'm forever grateful for the effort that Dave put in to kind of get me to come along with that dream with him, and it went really well for us. And it got me the start of the skill set that I needed to animate. And all I wanted to do was animate, because I was coming off the back of the whole Pixar animation mentor kind of wave of like,
oh yeah,
animators are storytellers and all this, and like whatever.
Yeah, all the jargon that comes along with it. You go, oh yeah, I can be sold into this dream that I am quite fanatical about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I worked in games for a couple of years. Now, I don't know if that was around the Renaissance that you're talking about. Like, there was this period where everyone seemed to be employed, and I was naive enough to just not know that I was in a good cycle. And one of the guys that was working there, Ron Mark, he was like, have you just noticed like everyone's working? And I'm like, no, this is how it's meant to be. So he'd obviously seen these cycles come and go. But then I knew I wanted to get into film, and games was not a place for me to kind of act out what I was interested in. And then Sydney happened when Happy Feet 2 came along, and that was me doing my first big venture. And that's how it became the Sydney thing. I was there for 3 years. And that was that was a powerful experience. I was
Was
raising kids, had a family, and trying to figure out the career thing and all that, and it was highly stressful. And that's when I started to get into the Sydney crowd, which is fantastic because that's still important to me. Those people and connections, and I don't even mean like industry connections, but those deep connections that occurred in Sydney are still really important to me. When I plug back into that. So that's my East Coast. That's my East Coast story. That's my relationship with East Coast Australia. I've done some work on the Gold Coast for when previous film jobs have come through there, and that's really cool.
Yep. All right. What, you just pop in and out for them, or?
Right, and so it's when the circus comes to town. So
yeah,
that's the business model that we're all trying to navigate and figure out.
Yeah.
And when you figure out how to do that, let me know.
So as previous artists, it is a little bit different because we're, I was really lucky, we teamed up down in Sydney and we actually got to work on a project and that.
Yeah, man.
And since then, it's interesting, like, as previous artists, you tend to be in at the start. And then when the animators come in and they all get locked in for like a year's worth of work, previous artists are kind of say, oh, you've got to go off and go find something else. So it's very interesting to kind of go, well, you bounce around a lot more than what like someone who's focused on animation really does. So
yeah, and I know it's tricky to generalize about all those experiences, but I saw versions of that play out in London because London has such a huge industry over there. There was such a ready supply of contracts for animators to kind of sit in that space and be employed. So that was an opportunity where an animator could sit still geographically, I guess. Now in Australia, how animators operate, I don't know. I've never really functioned as a finals animator in Australia, and I don't know what that's like other than you're going in between contracts, but it's usually feast and famine because there's no other projects around waiting for you to roll onto. But the London Previs experience was really interesting too because there was a big company there then that was third floor and they could just attract these jobs coming in Previs. Now we might have had longevity in work, but exactly what you said, you're on the project for a bit and then it's gone and then it'll sit in post for the next 18 months.
Yeah.
So there will be artists who have a relationship with that project for 18 months where we've had 6 months, which is still massive for Previs because normally it's like 6 weeks that you interact with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm really just repeating what you're saying, but there is something there. And what that alludes to is we're touching so many sequences in 6 months as previous artists because it's all about speed and process and rapid fire interaction. Yep. By the time it gets to post, I imagine that there's animators who are kind of just stuck with a sequence for 18 months.
Yeah,
I'm generalizing. So it is a totally different headspace.
Yeah. Well, how did you go? Because just to touch on a little bit further, like you said, coming from games, you've then gone to films because you've focused more on live action films than fully animated feature films, haven't you? You've done more with live action films. Oh,
good point. Ultimately, that's what's happened. So I didn't even know what the hell Previs was when I went down to Sydney. All I knew about Previs was I'd seen the behind the scenes on Lord of the Rings where there's like these grey, crappy, low-res elephants moving along and there's like Christian Rivers and the team doing things. I'm like, all right. And here they are asking for Previs artists. And all I wanted to do was just animate. So I am classically trained and classically interested in performance and editing and camera. Like that's the things that we're always, and building sequences that kind of have an effect on the audience. And that being an animated film, Happy Feet 2, I'm like, oh, cool. It was an intersection of all the things I was interested in. And it wasn't until I got to London that I started doing live action films. And that's when I was like, oh, okay, there's different requirements and outcomes. And I was on that thought. You learned that there were things you didn't need to worry about. You weren't worrying about performance in live action classically because the actors are going to do that.
Yep.
But then I started to understand that the needs or what you were generating in Previs and how that was going to get used by production who went out and built the thing and actually had to make that work were very different to doing some previously layout and animation that would then go down into a very controlled almost a linear kind of pipeline after that. So,
Yep. Yeah, because
and that's a big conversation.
Yeah, because the other thing, which, like you said, like you're saying with live action, is not only does it then go out into the big world where you actually get a lot of other people working on it in real life, it also then comes back into the pipeline for special effects, which is another thing you build in Previs. Is like, well, what sort of effects are we going to have in here? Where's dust, debris, explosions?
And even before that is post-viz, right? So it can come back into the Previs universe as post-viz, where you're still sketching out graphic solutions for edit.
Oh yeah.
That then inform the finals guys.
Yeah.
So you are right. We're still solving that stuff as well.
Yep.
And probably the only little nugget that I can kind of might be hitting the philosophical stuff too soon, too early, but this has revealed it to myself. It's come revealed to me that previs is a process, not an outcome. And if you really understand what that is, then you understand why that doesn't work in a VFX universe ontologically. And it's why these two things sit outside each other. Because VFX is trying to deliver an outcome, the final render. Previs is about the 30 versions you've done in a day because you have to see all the different options. And if you want to say the outcome is the process, it's literally experimenting.
Yeah. I really like that.
So whenever I've seen...
Yeah.
It's a good one, right? Yeah, and I got that from talking to... it was Richard Francis Moore at Weta. We were talking about that. And he and I were chatting about it, and it was interesting to kind of have that revelation, like, oh yeah, that's what it is. Because I've been exposed to situations now where other VFX companies try to embrace previs, and they're kind of open to it, and they're like, yeah, we know it, we get it. It's like a lightweight or pre-layout sort of thing, and there inevitably becomes a jank in headspace when you're, hey, I need to have this flexibility, and they kind of looking at you like the dev teams are like, I hear what you're saying, but that just doesn't make sense to me, because they don't realize that there's all these underlying assumptions that a VFX pipe has that do not sit with previs, and you end up kind of getting frustrated and angry at each other, but it's no one's fault. It's understanding these two truths, and then you can have a conversation about what you're really trying to achieve.
Yeah, because like you said, especially in Previs, the amount of versions that you actually do and the amount of stuff that gets thrown out is quite phenomenal compared to an animation pipeline where you really don't want to be animating anything that's going to be cut because it's so time consuming.
Well said.
Yeah.
In fact, everything about the VFX pipe is minimizing waste.
Yeah.
I'm speaking a little out of turn here because I haven't really existed in that, but I can speak with some kind of intuitive authority that people are trying to do work that doesn't get wasted. So Previs absolutely sits more akin to storyboarding, where it's just like, does this work? No, next. Does this work? No, next. And you've tried all these different things. The trouble becomes, now I'm just starting to sound like I'm having an old man rant. The trouble is that Previs looks and smells like a VFX pipe. It looks like you can deliver it. And so producers will tend to want to go, oh, we've done all this work in Previs, just send it. You've done the cameras. And you're like, whoa, hang on. We've done things to get this solution. Now you've gone and shot it, and now that's a little different, and these things are no longer, there's a separation at some point.
Yeah.
And that is what it is. And you just got to manage expectations there. But yeah, it looks and smells like final. So there's a desire to kind of send this stuff down the pipe. But I think another place where Previs gets a bit of an identity crisis is it usually gets attached to the VFX in films. And that's where, then VFX is post, right?
Yeah, that's right at the end, after everything.
Previs, and that's budgets, like it's coming out of the VFX budget and all this, but Previs probably should sit in art department. It probably should sit in pre-production, truly, in that space. But it doesn't, for all the reasons. But anyway, that's just a thing.
Yeah. Oh, let's touch on. You said you were over in London. How long were you in London for? Because that's a world away from here in Australia. So
3 winters is how I managed, or how I remember my time.
3
in
winters.
London.
Oh my God.
3 winters.
Yep.
And as a Queenslander, I learned that blue skies are very important to my psyche. Like, I feed on it. It's really, we're used to seeing blue skies, right? And London, when it sets in, the very first summer that I was there, it gets to a peak and it feels like the start of our summer, and then it drops off. And I'm like, whoa, man, that was a quick summer. And they're like, no, that was a long one. I'm like, oh. hence my use of seasons to describe my time there. But that was amazing, man. I mean, that was just, in some way I was acting out the thing that we as some Aussies do to kind of connect with the old world and whatnot. And you go over there like, yeah, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Turns out mostly they don't care about Australians anymore. They got over that a while ago.
Okay.
But it was just really cool to experience that. And on a personal level, it was amazing because, we put our kids into schooling over there. So it was very different to when we asked our friends for advice. They go, oh, London's great, all these reasons. But it turns out their experience and their advice was coming from when they were backpackers, living completely different lives. And and we went over there with the responsibility of a family. So it was very, very challenging. But the sheer volume of work, was incredible to watch in London, just to see. I remember one of my first days the first couple of months that I was there with the company, and everything had gone quiet. And I'm like the work hadn't started to come in. And I'm like, coming from the Australian experience, I'm like, well, I guess this is where we get fired. Like, that's the end of it, right? Yeah. But the guys who were there were from London, like, no, it's just downtime. We're fine. We're sweet. I'm like, dude, when a group of artists sit around for this long and they're not generating work, we're gone. But they were right. It was a lull because the industry was so big there at the time. I don't know what it's like now. Yep. But companies could just apparently weather this sort of pause in work. Yeah.
The ups and downs, or the flow, the ebbs and flows of the periods.
That's when I realized I came with an Australian sentimentality. I came with a headspace that had informed me, having tried to make a career in the Australian experience, which is one of complete skepticism. We don't trust any contracts, and we're constantly in this like fight or flight mode of just like to relax on a job is like you're just asking to be sucker punched.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at now. I'm trying to just let some of that tension down now, because I'm still operating like I'm a 20-year-old kid who has no experience and no kind of career opportunities. But that's not true. I'm largely okay.
Yeah.
It's hard to dial that stuff off, man.
Yeah, it's really hard to focus. Like, we've both got very similar experiences in that, we've got a lot of skills, a lot of soft skills, which is hard to actually notice that it's valuable. The soft skills you pick up after working through a big studio, like a number of big studios, you've got a lot of skills at being adaptable, and you've seen a lot of different pipelines, and it's hard to know that those skills are worth something, or know how to present it to someone to say, look, I've got all of these experiences, I can kind of work you through this quite happily, or you can say, I can just do it.
Where do you think that comes from, that continuing self-doubt? Because you're right. I think what you just said is true.
Yep.
But why is our instinct to be apologetic and be nervous in presenting ourselves?
I think there's a couple of things which put into that. Number one is, like, especially for Australians, you're right. We have a very small industry, whereas if you're not going 100% all the time, you're right. You're out on your ass. When you're 20 odd, you kind of just go, oh yeah, I'll just go find another job. It's only once you've got out of it a couple of times and you've gone, you know what? I'm just going to go sell some vacuum cleaners because it's a bit more stable than the special effects industry. I think that's one case. The other one is, as a society as a whole, we don't really build ourselves up to go, you are a valuable individual that can contribute to a community. I notice that, especially with kids now, you look at a different generation now, that we've been putting those skills into kids, and they've got more confidence in their own skills to go, you know what, I can do stuff for myself as a whole. Whereas you look at like my parents' generation, it was like you relied a lot on a big company, or you had a job for a lifetime. I think there's a couple of contributing factors to why we approach life differently.
Yes. That's interesting, and I think you're totally dialing into something I've been aware of. I don't know whether we were a pivot generation there, but we definitely were raised on the whole death of a salesman kind of thing, right? Like, to not trust the institution of the company. And that has borne out to be true over and over again. We don't trust the contracts we're given. We just go, we know we can have our throats cut any minute.
Yeah.
It's written and you've got a week's notice or something. You're like, all right, that's just the way it is. But then we get incredibly nervous when we have to say in reverse to a company, I need to leave early. And you were like, oh, we're so apologetic. You think you're going to offend them. It's like, no, it goes both ways. We actually have incredible freedom to leave, but usually we want to stay there. And they know that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's super hard. And I guess that puts you into this, trying to bring this into a coherent thought, which is pretty rare for me, but you end up having to back yourself as an individual, because if you can't trust the companies, unfortunately you can't, because they're just part of the market, right? And the market's unstable, so they're just going to respond, and we're just in that. It's in some way no one's fault. It's just don't trust anyone. They say, you're fine for the next 6 years. Like, okay.
Yeah.
Use your own intuition on that. So you end up backing yourself, but then we still have this attitude of like, oh, I'm not good enough. And waiting to be found out as frauds, and we're not.
No, it's really hard. The other part of that, which is really hard, is actually negotiating contracts. Because we don't have, as an industry, we don't really have any industry backing to know what the guy sitting next to you is actually getting paid. You usually end up having to negotiate your own contracts, and if you don't know what you're worth and you're trying to constantly get work, you usually undersell your skills.
Yes. Yeah. The whole thing trades on fear and suspicion. Yeah. Like it's designed that way. And I mean, that's a huge conversation about just the modern free market anyway, but that's the way it is. And they know this, but we get around it as artists by building connections like you and I, just people that we trust, and we share information, but it takes a long time to build that trust.
Yeah. It's a long time to find the people, because even though
exactly.
It's great when you go, you get into a new team and it's just like, yes, we're all working on a team together and things are magical. And then you're 3 months into it working, 16, 18-hour days. You're going, I really just wish you'd shut up. I just got stuff to do.
I've never had anyone say that to me. What are you talking about? Gareth, asshole, keeps talking. Yeah, well, but about the teams thing, that's the wacky thing with Previs, is because you have these short, sharp experiences with people under incredibly tense, pressurized situations, you build rapport. You build, because you connect over vulnerability. When you're down and this guy like picked you up and you're like, okay, I'll take your shot, or here, you need this info, and you work together, and then contract's finished, team's dissolved, and you're out, and you go through this trauma of just like, I don't know, being voted off the island or something. You lose that, and I couldn't handle that for many, many years. It was just like, this is horrible, man. I mean, it's like having intense relationships that then just stop. But I just now have historical knowledge that you don't know what happens in the future, and these people, they come back into your life. Like you might stay in touch through social media, or whatever, but highly likely these people come back into your life, and you can't plan or predict it, but it's incredible.
No, I mean, it's almost something like when you're working, you kind of, if someone kind of says, oh, do you know anyone who's available? You're like, you know what? I had this really great time with this team.
Yeah, man.
And it's the individuals you pick out of that team and go, I just want to work with them again, because it's, you just click.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, even the way we've stayed in touch now, and you've got, this conversation's happening now. We met as strangers on that project in Sydney.
Yep.
Went through some pretty nutty stuff, man. To get those
that was
giant ass robots running, and here we are. You can stay in touch.
I mean, that in itself is a great experience to talk about. Just having in the back lot of a studio, just half a dozen computers on a table, thinking, you know what, this is actually previs for a big film. It's like, yeah, really? Okay.
Totally, it's super sketchy.
It is.
And I've had a hard time. And by all means, direct me onto different themes and subjects if you see we're going over old ground. But I've come to realize that that's actually what Previs does well. Is it's incredibly humble. It shows its own humility, and it never tries to have any ego attached to it. So you're inevitably stuck in some crappy little portacom, some little demountable thing where the air conditioning is horrible, and you're like, man, I'm better than this. And that's true. I think we should always be pushing for comfortable conditions to work in. But Previs is designed, when you have the right headspace for Previs, You're the guy who's kind of just guy or girl that's just dropped into a situation. You can turn your own computer on and you kind of go, oh, this is the situation. What do you need the shots? Oh, okay. And you start, and then you ask your own questions, and you're incredibly autonomous. And that's how Previs has tended to function that I've seen on set. That is this small, humble little thing that everyone for a long time is like, what's this Previs stuff, man? Oh, here's the thing. So I've seen this play out over every project I've worked on. Previs goes through 3 stages on a culturally on a project. They suffer suspicion, then they go to acceptance, and then dependence by the directors or the editors. And it goes all the way. It always starts out that way. The production is like, what's this Previs rubbish? How are you here to screw me over, right?
Yeah.
And they get over that. They see the trust because we're very humble. We're trying to say, hey, we're just here to help, man. Just what do you need? What you need this, you need that. Then they start to they accept it. Oh, okay, Previs. And then by the end of the shoot, they're dependent on it. Like, God, we need to Previs it. God, they've been doing these shots like this for 100 years, but now they depend on Previs because there's so much trust built into that relationship. So that's been interesting to watch.
Well, I mean, the best thing about this is we get to just say, all right, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks, Gareth, for sharing the wealth of kind of previous experience. I'm sure we'll actually get to chat again at some point. So until the next time, everybody, I say bye-bye.